I was recently loaned a Switch and played through Breath of the Wild for the first time, and I found myself continually frustrated and annoyed with the game. Overall, I can say I didn't enjoy it, which I really didn't see coming, although I probably should have. I once again found myself trapped in a similar cycle of frustration and bewilderment. I found fault in the story, writing, voice acting, combat, puzzles, and the dungeons. Basically, everything involving the story was amiss for me. Thankfully, I enjoyed the emergent systemic side of the game, like being able to climb anything, the magnetic properties of metal, being able to start fires anywhere, and the various ways that you could interact with the world. I found all that very cool and decently charming, but in aggregate, I disliked the game, often passionately. The small details were impressive and neat, but never enough to win me over, and the big picture of the game left me very frustrated and feeling isolated. I found myself going through familiar mental paths I'd walked before. How is this game so popular? How is this the 6th highest rated game on Metacritic? And similarly to Deus Ex, I forced myself to finish it despite not liking it. The moments where I found myself most frustrated were those where I felt like Breath of the Wild overwrote its own rules in favor of a predetermined outcome, and I think this is best exemplified by Gerudo Town. As you probably know, Gerudo Town requires you to dress Link up in women's clothing in order to sneak into the village, and this bothered me rather heavily, and not just because I didn't appreciate the cross-dressing. This was the final divine beast, and up until this point the majority of the game suggested that most problems often have multiple solutions. If you've played the game, you know it's very flexible, and yet this part is hard-coded to prevent the player from being able to actually sneak into Gerudo Town. You can climb the walls all you want, but the second you cross the threshold, the game will cut to black and throw you on your back. No voe allowed. It's an ancient tradition, you see. Despite the game having a stealth system, letting you climb any surface, or the ability to glide hundreds of meters, you are not allowed to use any of those to sneak in. You must follow the path the developers have set up for you. This really disappointed me. I thought this would finally present me with a problem I could use these systems to solve in a way that I would really enjoy. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Had I been more keenly focused on how the game handled each story arc earlier, I would have seen this coming a mile away, because the same thing happens with each divine beast before this one. All of them have environmental obstacles that require a uniform to progress. And I felt like these sections overwrote the rules of the game used up until then, which were essentially that anything that works, works. And you could often find unintended ways to succeed, except not here. You are required to use specific outfits, otherwise you're going to die. These environmental hazards didn't feel like puzzles I needed to solve, but obstacles put there merely to slow me down and make me spend rupees. And only the Zora armor had the benefit of character development, showing the armor as a token of Mipha's love. All the others were more like incidental outfits needed to get into a gated area, which is literally the case with Gerudo Town. Truth be told, I already knew I needed to wear women's clothing at some point, but what I didn't know was that I actually could not sneak in on my own. So I wanted to at least try, just to see if I could. I think in this moment, if I had been able to, the game might have won me over. At least in part, I could say in retrospect that was really cool. Unfortunately, it was just the 4th iteration of the same thing, this time with Midriff. It didn't help that this divine beast's boss was the most frustrating enemy in the game, too. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. Of all the sections of the game, Gerudo Town was probably the most frustrating, both for its limitations and its boss. Out of my time with the game, there were only a few moments that I really enjoyed and where I could say that Breath of the Wild truly clicked with me. One of which was climbing the dueling peaks and completing both shrines. That was probably the highlight of my entire playthrough. The sun began to set while I was near the peak of one of the mountains, and I just stopped and took in the dusk landscape as the sun set behind a mountain range. I was moved enough to take a picture of it with my phone, something I hadn't done in a very long time. I found that very compelling, moving, and memorable. Sadly, I never really had this deep of a connection with the game again, aside from a handful of lesser moments like that. I usually just found myself frustrated, apathetic, or both. Not really caring about it, just wanting to get it over with. But this frustration eventually made me wonder, why am I getting frustrated by certain elements of Breath of the Wild when those same elements are compelling in other games? What is it about this game that bugs me so much? Why do I miss the overworld music in Breath of the Wild, but the same lack of music is fine for Dark Souls? Why is it bothersome when Breath of the Wild forces me to use a specific solution, but that same kind of design is awesome in Baldur's Gate 1 or Doom Eternal? Why is walking long distances on foot kinda tedious here, but I can somehow say I love Death Stranding with a straight face? Why are simple puzzles bad in the Divine Beasts, but something I consider a huge plus in Devil May Cry or Ninja Gaiden Black? Why is a generally empty Hyrule uninspiring, but it's so moving in Shadow of the Colossus? Why is high lethality and a wide range of uninteresting weapons bad here, but Elden Ring gets away with it just fine? Why? I honestly don't know. The best conclusion I can come up with goes back to my issue with Deus Ex. Expectations. The distance between what I expect from Zelda games and what Breath of the Wild offers. What I want from Zelda is more akin to Ocarina of Time, something less open world and less emergent. But that doesn't answer why things that I found to be negative in Breath of the Wild are positive elsewhere, other than, obviously, context. But I began to question my own taste, the why rather than the what. And if I tried to answer, I might say that these factors aren't necessarily positives in those other contexts, but when combined with the other elements, they are either neutral or negligible enough to not be a big deal. But that's a total cop-out answer, as some of the things I disliked in Breath of the Wild I do actually consider positives in other games. So that answer is at best an unintentionally false self-justification, or at worst me lying to myself. And it also requires me to be perfectly consistent in all things across all things, which is obviously an impossibility. So upon realizing that, the most honest answer I can give is just, I like those other games. I like Dark Souls, I like Baldur's Gate, Doom Eternal, Devil May Cry, and Ninja Gaiden Black. I like Shadow of the Colossus, and I like Elden Ring. So their negatives literally just don't bother me. I can overlook them, which means, in contrast, that I just don't like Breath of the Wild. And in focusing on these elements, I am perhaps seeking justifications for disliking the game, and I forced myself to complete it to legitimize those justifications, along with being able to say that I did it and that I didn't give up. That way I could alleviate any potential digs at my supposed gamer cred. No one can say I didn't at least try. I didn't give up. I didn't like this game, and now I'm justified in not liking it, as if preemptively defending myself from online detractors, which, it's sad to admit, happened several times during my playthrough. I found myself fighting shadows, little trolls in my head telling me I had bad taste in games because I didn't like Breath of the Wild. What? That can't be. I have great taste. In truth, those voices are just my own wearing a mask, self-doubt masquerading as external threats. Is the game bad, or am I bad? It ain't that deep, dude. Jeez. It's okay to just not like something, he says to himself reassuringly. Perhaps such sharp inward knives are the result of years of arguing for sport online. Or maybe that was actually a symptom the whole time. I think the truth is I set myself up to fail here. I never really cared about Breath of the Wild, much like I never really cared about Deus Ex. I played them because I felt like I had to. For years I had heard that they were the best game ever, and I got upset when I felt they were overrated. I judged other people's taste, which caused me to reflect that same judgment back at myself. In judging others, I judged myself. I'm an insecure video game snob. That's not very healthy. Very briefly, I played a game called Kind Words. The premise is as it is named. You give other people kind words to help them with their problems. In helping others, I sought help too, and one of the messages I received still hangs in my mind. I think you care too much about what other people think. Brutal. They're right. I care too much about what other people think, and I think I'm too critical about it too. I give too much credence to things like taste and opinion. I enjoy talking in depth about such matters, which often leads to arguments about subjective topics using objective rhetoric that is often ill-equipped to handle such matters, which has trained me to view the things I claim to enjoy with that same critical lens. A recipe for angst. A very bad way to go about things. I have often felt like I have to fully articulate or defend my opinions, perhaps out of an insecurity from years of arguing for sport online, or perhaps because I care too much about what others think, both about me and maybe just in general. It's something that I'll somehow have to let go. At the end of the day, it really shouldn't matter to me all that much if I go against the grain in matters of taste.